So welcome everyone to our week 4, term 2 statewide staff meeting on the high potential and gifted education policy. This is our very first Thursday meeting, so welcome to anyone who's joining us for the first time. My name is Elizabeth Robertson and I'm the Coordinator, Languages and Culture at the New South Wales Department of Education. In today's session, we will be looking at high potential and gifted education in languages 7 to 12. Please note this session is being recorded so we can share it with anyone who couldn't join us today. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands we are meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I would like to acknowledge that I am on the lands of the Wallamedical people in Ryde. I would also like to extend my respect to any Aboriginal people who are joining us today. Everyone. Evia, if you could just mute anyone who still has their microphone on, that would be lovely. So if you haven't already, please sign in via the chat, which is the little speech bubble at the top of your screen. You open the chat, type in your name and school, and if there are a group of you watching together, please type all names and schools in the chat. Joining us for today's session is Marek Brewster. Marek is the 7 to 12 HPGE, High Potential and Gifted Education Project Officer with the department and brings with him a wealth of expertise.
Yes, hi Elizabeth. Hello to everyone. Thank you very much for having me along to your statewide staff room. Look forward to discussing HPG with you in languages today.
So let's start with an introduction to the policy before moving on to what it means for us as language teachers. This statement on the slide sits at the very start of the high potential and gifted education policy, and it's one of the key messages we'd like you to take away from today. High expectations and effective, explicit, evidence-based teaching create optimal learning environments where all students are challenged and engaged to achieve their educational potential. What that means is effective pedagogy supports all students. So during today's session, we'll be looking at pedagogy too. You'll notice many of our slides today, we've included a hyperlink. These links take you to the High Potential and Gifted Education web section where you can learn more about what's on the slide. We've included these links so you can access the presentation after today. We will share it in the statewide staff room and explore the relevant sections at your leisure. It's an excellent site with a comprehensive range of support materials. The High Potential and Gifted Education team has this slogan on all their promotional materials: "A rising tide lifts all ships." It's originally from JF Kennedy, referring to the economy, but I think it's been repurposed beautifully here. Its key message is that effective pedagogy supports all students to grow. Why do we have a new policy? The very pragmatic response to this question is that the department was asked to review the 2004 Gifted and Talented policy to meet a 2015 election commitment. However, there's much more behind the review than this. Since the 2004 policy, our understanding of what works best in teaching and learning has evolved, particularly for high potential and gifted students, as has our understanding of talent development. As you know, the department's strategic plan outlines a range of goals, including that every student is known, valued and cared for in our schools, that every student improves every year, that every student is engaged and challenged to continue to learn, and that our education system reduces the impact of disadvantage. Once again, if you'd like to learn more, please watch the How and Why video at the URL on the slide. It's only 2 minutes long and provides a really great background. Marek, as you and the team developed the policy, what were the guiding principles?
Thanks, Elizabeth. So in developing the HPG policy, the department worked with the Centre for Educational Statistics and Evaluation, or CC, as it's more commonly known, and they published the Revisiting Gifted Education Literature Review. This review, for those that haven't come across it, synthesises the best available research, particularly that has occurred since the 2004 Gifted and Talented policy, so relevant research in the last 15 years. And this review was instrumental in supporting the development of the policy. Hand in hand with the literature review, the policy's development was underpinned by 5 guiding principles. And these guiding principles are: the policy sets high expectations for teachers and students. And this links back to the opening statement in the policy about creating optimal learning environments that Elizabeth had on the slide earlier, where all students are challenged and engaged. Secondly, the policy acknowledges that there are 4 domains of potential. This is a key differentiation from the earlier 2004 policy, and these domains of potential don't sit in isolation, but we'll be looking at these shortly. The third is the policy is applicable across all New South Wales public schools, from preschool to year 12. It acknowledges potential as being on a continuum, and so it's necessary for students to be given the opportunity to grow. And I'll explore this idea further in a moment. And finally, the policy supports students from all backgrounds, including socioeconomic, cultural, language, geographical area, and disability, because we know that high potential and gifted students come from all backgrounds. Once again, if you'd like to know more about the guiding principles that supported the policy's development, you can watch the video that's hyperlinked on this slide. And this unpacks the guiding principles in more detail.
In summary, this is the shift in thinking. So we've moved from a gifted and talented policy, which focused on intellectually gifted students and/or those with a recognised talent, to the high potential and gifted education policy, which has a broader focus on high potential students and on finding potential, recognising underachievement, and the role of school leaders and teachers in supporting talent development. 4 domains of potential: social, emotional, creative, physical, and intellectual. Understanding the diversity of high potential students, for example, as Marek said, Aboriginal, rural and remote, and students with disability, and focusing on assessing and identifying student needs, growth, and talent development. As you can see, the new policy supports a much broader group of students. Every single school, P to 12, across New South Wales will have high potential and gifted students. So this policy is core business for all of us. Marek, could you explain to us a little bit more about what we mean by talent development?
So the concept of talent development is very important to the high potential and gifted education policy. It's one of the key differences from the 2004 policy, where we referred to students as gifted and talented. Instead, you'll see the policy is now talking about high potential and gifted students. So what this means is that the policy itself is underpinned by the work of Professor Francois Gagné and his differentiated model of talent development. Basically, talent development refers to the development of a student's high potential into high performance or high achievement in a specific domain or field. Gagné's model was chosen to support or underpin the policy for a variety of reasons, including that it's the most commonly used model in Australia across all jurisdictions, including non-government schools, and is also referenced with the work of Akara and Neza. The model that you're seeing on the slide at the moment has been adapted for the policy and is specific to the HPG policy, so it may look a little different to other versions you've seen. On the left of the model, you can see the 4 domains of potential. Students may possess high potential in the intellectual domain, the creative, the social emotional, or the physical, but in many cases, they'll possess high potential or giftedness across 2 or more of those domains. In the center of the model, you can see it describes the process and the nature of talent development, and specifically our role as educators in making an impact for talent development to occur. With the right combination of catalysts, including both internal and external factors, high potential can develop into high performance. Again, on the HPG website, you can watch a short video that explains talent development in a nice and easy to understand animation. In developing talent, it's important to understand that just like there's a continuum of potential, there's a continuum of development where students move through various stages of competency along this continuum from novice to competency to mastery. There are many factors that you have seen in the model referred to as catalysts that can facilitate talent development, and these include setting high expectations, ensuring that you're providing challenging learning opportunities that also extend the student, explicitly teaching the knowledge and the skills student needs to succeed, allowing opportunities for sustained and deliberate practice, and providing a range of opportunities to engage students and identify their learning interests through a supportive learning environment. Providing these opportunities for students to showcase their potential is critical. Personally, as I became more experienced as a teacher, my initial impressions of who I thought my high potential students were was always different by the end of the first term of every school year. As I provided my students with more opportunities, I started to see high potential where initially I did not. So as language teachers, think for a moment about how you can develop high potential into high performance in languages. What strategies do you use to develop talent? In a moment, we're going to take a look at some of these through the differentiation adjustment tool, which hopefully will give you a lot of great ideas to walk away with at the end of this session.
So let's take a little bit of a deeper look at the 4 domains of potential and possible characteristics that students may have. As Marek mentioned, the 4 domains are social emotional, creative, physical, and intellectual. High potential students are those whose potential exceeds that of students of the same age in one or in more of these 4 domains. Before we look at possible characteristics of high potential and gifted students in each domain, it's important to be aware that some high potential and gifted students may exhibit other characteristics and behaviours that can actually challenge teachers and mystify their classmates. Some of these characteristics may even be counterproductive to learning. For example, challenging authority, poor self-control, difficulty with group participation, questioning the ideas of others, frustration when expectations aren't met, impatience and boredom with learning experiences that do not provide challenge or interest, and anxiety and perfectionism, partly caused by the asynchronous development of their cognitive and social skills, their emotions, and their giftedness. You could also go so far as to say that sometimes you'll find students with high potential in the deputy's office. Many high potential and gifted students can have difficulty navigating the school system, and that's why it's so wonderful that the new policy looks at the 4 domains of potential and not just intellectual giftedness.
So for high potential and gifted students across the 4 domains, they learn in ways that can be characterized by their diverse profiles. It's important to understand that many characteristics cross the 4 domains of potential, but some are more relevant to one domain than to the others. So let's take a look at some sample characteristics for each domain. And I must emphasize that these are sample characteristics, as those in each domain may be found in all learners, but will be strongly evident in high potential and gifted learners. Also, high potential and gifted students may exhibit only some of the characteristics of each domain. These characteristics that are shown in this presentation today should be used as only one source of evidence. So the policy talks about using multiple sources of evidence to assess and identify student needs. These characteristics, they're not exhaustive, and you should not consider them as a checklist. Here are some of the sample characteristics of a student who is high potential or gifted in the intellectual domain. I'll give you a moment now to read through these. In the top right of the screen, you'll see the hyperlink to where you can access the full list for each of the domains on the HPGE web section.
Sample characteristics for a student who is high potential or gifted in the creative domain may include they make unusual associations between different ideas, they demonstrate novel thinking in written and oral expression, flexibility and divergence in thinking. They may have an unusual ability for expressing themselves through art, dance, drama, or music, and they may be able to create several solutions to a given problem.
For students who are high potential or gifted in the social emotional domain, you may see an advanced social and communication skills, a strong sense of empathy, well respected by their peers, inner self-confidence, and a particular advocacy for social justice.
When you look at the domains, the characteristics of this domain on the website, you'll also see demonstrated leadership and decision-making skills, as well as advanced organisational and management skills. When Marek and I were designing this presentation, that really stood out to me because my son is gifted in the social emotional domain, and as his mother, I would say he's the opposite of organised. So it's just an important reminder that a student may have some of the characteristics for a particular domain, but not all of them. There also may be other factors at play, such as disability, which we'll look at in a moment.
Finally, characteristics of students who are high potential or gifted in the physical domain may include their self-disciplined, coordinated, balanced, and naturally confident in physical activities, have high energy levels, a superior understanding of spatial relationships, and endurance, stamina, and persistence in physical activities. As I explained earlier, a student's potential, thinking back to Gagne's model, is more likely to develop into talent if educators are able to recognise potential and use evidence-based talent development to optimise their growth and achievement. And there is the key difference. High potential and gifted students that focus on talent development, taking their potential, developing it into talent, as opposed to saying our students are gifted and talented already.
Thanks, Marek. It's important we also take a moment to talk about high potential and gifted students with disability. These students are also known as twice exceptional students. The HPGE policy and their website uses the term high potential and gifted students with disability so that the students qualify under other disability provisions. Twice exceptional is the term used by the international community. With high potential and gifted students with disability, there are other factors at play which may impact our ability to recognise a student's potential. So high potential and gifted students with disability experience one or more challenges in addition to high potential and giftedness. These challenges may include autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, medical issues which include mental health issues, dyslexia and dysgraphia. These additional challenges may impact a student's ability to learn and/or may also impact the characteristics of the domain or the domains in which they have high potential or giftedness. Sometimes these students present as disruptive, disengaged, frustrated, or even slow in processing information. And they're often misunderstood by some of their teachers. High potential and gifted students with disability, because they're often misunderstood or trickier to identify as having high potential, often need a champion, a teacher who advocates for them and who takes the time to get to know them and to understand their needs. Maybe you teach some of these students already and you know just how rewarding it can be for their families and for you when their potential is recognised. Before we finish this section, here's something absolutely critical to remember. When differentiating, you make adjustments based on the needs of the individual student. So this is Ella, age 12. That's not an actual picture of Ella, but her characteristics, behaviours and challenges are all real. Let's learn a little bit more about Ella. Ella set up her own charity when she was in year 4. She's very well respected by her peers, the cool kids and the not so cool kids alike. She has a strong sense of social justice, and she even refused to sit the selective schools test because she believes all schools should offer equal opportunities for all students. That strong sense of social justice can also get her into trouble. If she sees a teacher treating another student or herself in a way that she deems unfair or unreasonable, she'll lash out. She's a talented songwriter and plays guitar. She has advanced communication skills. Her extended written responses show novel thinking, and she's a very skilled debater. She's knowledgeable in her areas of passion, which include history and Minecraft. Ella can also struggle with group participation, often getting frustrated with her classmates. She also struggles with drills and practice activities. Ella has dysgraphia, which severely impacts her ability to handwrite. She also suffers from anxiety and struggles with the school environment. As a result, she's often seen as disengaged or difficult to please. Looking at Ella, we can't use only her behaviours and characteristics to identify and assess her needs, but they do contribute to shaping a fuller picture of her needs as a learner. Ella was identified by her primary school as being gifted across two domains, the social emotional and the creative. Her high school has also identified that Ella is intellectually gifted in some subjects, but underperforming in others. So the question for Ella's teachers is how to see if Ella has high potential in other subjects, and if she does, how do we move her high potential to high performance? Remember, there will be overlap in Ella's characteristics across the domains of her high potential and giftedness. So I'd almost ask you to picture those red boxes as a Venn diagram instead of as a list on the slide, if that helps. Finally, Ella has been identified as a high potential and gifted student with disability. And she actually has an individual education plan developed in collaboration with Ella, her family, and the school's learning and support team. That's a lot to take in, but don't panic. The main point is that we need to be aware of the need to recognise what may sit behind a student's behaviours before we can start meeting their individual learning needs. We're going to come back to Ella later in the presentation after we've looked at something called the differentiation adjustment tool, which will support you in making adjustments to meet the needs of individual students just like Ella. So that concludes the very brief introduction to the policy and characteristics across the four domains, including the characteristics of our student Ella. Now let's take a look at our context, languages, so we can explore what the implementation of the policy looks like for us. What can high potential and gifted students look like in the languages context? What characteristics might we see? A student may recognise relationships between words very quickly. They may retain what is seen, heard, or read with minimal reinforcement. They may enjoy using new language skills in writing or speaking, showing creativity and imagination. They may respond swiftly and confidently to extended listening and reading texts using a range of strategies, often strategies that they develop themselves. They may also become easily bored during repetition tasks such as flashcard drills. They may make connections and classify words and structures to learn more efficiently. They may produce sophisticated sentences, especially given the level of language that they've learned. They often have fun with language, making things up and transferring with ease from context to context. They may be curious, seeking solutions and asking further questions. They may be able to draw inferences from a very early age. They may also have heightened sensitivity, which is important to remember in relation to feedback. They may distinguish and reproduce fine nuances of pronunciation and intonation. And they may have some very strong opinions, especially in group work. This, like the characteristics across the four domains of potential, this isn't a definitive checklist, but it may be a good starting point when used in the combination with the characteristics that we mentioned earlier. In languages, we need to acknowledge that we have the added layers of a student's language level compared to their cognitive level, especially if they have no prior experience with the language. I'm sure you've seen this yourselves when you have a student who wants to just run at the language and use it, but because we've only just started in stage 4, they don't have the language skills yet. So that's one of the implications for our context in languages. And the other added layer that we have in languages is which learner group the student may belong to. Are they learning the language as a second or additional language? Or do they have prior experience in the language? Or do they have a background in the language? Don't fall into the trap of thinking that an activity designed for background speakers may be used as an extension activity for a student with high potential in the intellectual domain. It's just not that simple. On the screen, you can see 3 examples from our website of activities which have been developed for students with prior learning and/or experience, or students with background knowledge. And I'm just going to give you a moment to read those 3. As you can see, these activities are designed for a student who has more experience in the language, which is very different to having high potential or giftedness in language learning. A student with high potential or giftedness in the intellectual domain in languages would most likely not have the linguistic skills to complete these types of tasks. That doesn't mean you can't use these type of activities for inspiration, but be mindful of the scaffolds or the additional teacher direction students may need to complete the task successfully. And the strategy of grouping high potential and gifted students with background speakers can be fraught with danger and result in frustration for all students involved. The background speaker or speakers may not be able to explain linguistic features to their peers, which can actually result in decreased rather than increased engagement. As the teacher, you are best placed to design and implement the support your high potential and gifted students need in order to develop their talent in languages. And remember, a student may have prior learning and/or experience and/or a background in a language and also be high potential or gifted in one of more of the domains. The differentiation adjustment tool, which we're about to look at, provides excellent support in helping you manage the complex realities of the different learners in our classrooms in languages. So let's take a look at the tool. The differentiation adjustment tool is available on the HPGE website. It provides a range of suggestions to support the specific learning needs of high potential and gifted students. The tool provides a range of adjustment strategies organised into 9 approaches, and you can see those 9 approaches on the screen: complexity, challenge, choice, abstraction, creative and critical thinking, higher order thinking, pace, authenticity, and learning environment. The tool can be found at the URL on the slide, remembering we'll share this presentation afterwards, or you can easily find it by Googling differentiation adjustment tool. I'm just going to step out of my presentation for a moment on the screen so we can take a look at the actual website and you can understand how it's been set out. Okay, so here it is. So just so you're aware, differentiation is the overall process of meeting the needs of the students in your classroom. Adjustments are changes you make to meet the needs of an individual student. So the name of the differentiation adjustment tool encompasses both processes, the overall and the individual. So here on the screen, you can see the 9 adjustments that I just had on my PowerPoint slide. So let's take a look at a couple of them so you can see how it works. So I'm going to look first at challenge. So let's click on that, and all that's doing is actually taking me down the page to where challenge is. Okay, so let's have a look at challenge. To support the specific learning needs of high potential and gifted students, of course we can adjust the level of challenge we provide through our teaching, learning and assessment activities. Strategies for adjusting challenge are listed here on the left, and this includes ascertaining prior knowledge, integration across disciplines, transfer of knowledge, explicit reasoning, and so on. The tool includes the strategies here on the left, as well as what it looks like in the classroom here on the right, so examples of applications. So in this case, when we apply these strategies in the classroom, it could look like creating opportunity for negotiated independent projects following pre-test analysis. It could look like applying new skills and knowledge to a different context. Particularly in the languages classroom, it can look like using real-world problems from the local, in brackets, language-speaking community to create a problem-based learning project, and so on. Underneath each differentiation adjustment category, you'll see a link to the Digital Learning Selector. That's what the DLS stands for here, the Digital Learning Selector. So let's just open that up so you can see what's there. What this does is it provides you with links to digital tools which can support students in applying the strategy above, so in this case, challenge. For example, you can check for prior knowledge through something like Kahoot or through a mind mapping tool like Bubble.us. So let's take a look at another strategy. That was just a really quick look at challenge. So if I scroll back to the top of the page, and this time I'm going to look at pace. Okay, so that's popped me down to the bottom of the page where we're going to look at pace. So the strategies on the left for adjusting pace include, you could probably guess some of these: greater speed, less repetition, less time, ascertaining prior knowledge, again, that was in challenge as well, combining outcomes, which we often do in languages, and expecting outcomes to be achieved earlier. So in the classroom, what might you see, which is on the right-hand side? So in the classroom, you might see using formative assessment to inform the direction of the next teaching and learning phase. You might see compacting the curriculum in response to an analysis of pre-testing results. You might see combining more than one outcome so that the learning becomes more complex. And you may see spending less time on learning new material or skills compared to age peers. I'm hoping that as I've really quickly unpacked those two adjustment strategies, pace and challenge, I'm hoping what you're thinking to yourselves is, this sounds just like quality teaching, and it is. We're going to look at that more in a moment. So I'm just going to hop back into my PowerPoint. And there we are. So the tool, the differentiation adjustment tool, is not a list of mandated strategies. It exists to support you to make decisions about your teaching and learning activities. While some of the strategies in the differentiation adjustment tool may seem less applicable to stages 4 or 5, they may be very suitable to background speakers and to stage 6 students, including those studying extension, in context or literature courses. I just mentioned the link between the differentiation adjustment tool and quality teaching. When we, the languages and culture team, first looked at the tool, we noticed that many of our sample units of work that we have on our website contain activities and tasks which are already aligned with many of the strategies. And I'm sure that when you look at your units of work, you'll notice the same thing. On the screen, you can see some of the strategies that we noticed across all of the sample stage 4 units that are currently on our website. So this includes ascertaining prior knowledge, all of our units do that, transfer of knowledge, planning open-ended tasks, encouraging risk-taking and experimentation, creativity, and so on. On the right-hand side, you can see that we then organised that into the adjustment type that the strategy aligned with. So for example, for ascertaining prior knowledge, that aligned with challenge and pace, as we just saw. Planning open-ended tasks aligns with choice, creativity aligns with higher order thinking, and so on. Okay. This made us realise the value of what we had already designed in our units of work. Going back to the statement at the start of the HPGE policy that I had on one of the very first slides, that high expectations and effective, explicit, evidence-based teaching create optimal learning environments where all students are challenged and engaged to achieve their educational potential. What the tool then enabled us to do, however, was to adjust our existing activities in order to meet the learning needs of individual students. Let's take a look at what I mean. Let's start small, and in this example, we're going to adjust the level of challenge to meet the needs of a student. This is a stage 4 example based on family members and descriptions. To practice new vocabulary and structures, students could complete these base activities: matching text to photographs and a closed passage. And here's a sample activity in which we adjusted the level of challenge for an individual student. So the student could rewrite one of the texts from the perspective of a different family member. The strategy we've used here is adjusting challenge, and the student is transferring knowledge to a new context. Students could complete the adjusted activity in addition to the base activities of the closed passage and the photographs. In this case, we would also be adjusting pace by requiring greater speed and having less repetition. However, if the student is completing the adjusted activity in place of those two base activities, then we're not adjusting pace. So it depends on the context. Meeting the needs of high potential and gifted students isn't about giving more work, it's about adjusting the work to meet the needs of the individual student. Let's stick with stage 4 for another example, and this time we adjusted the level of choice. Here's the content we're teaching this time and some sample base activities. You can see students are learning to say how often they eat and drink certain items. I'll just give you a moment to read it. And here are some sample adjustments based on choice. Students could keep a food diary for a week and then discuss it. Students could create a promotional poster for a healthy eating campaign or create a word climb for frequency. Students could choose an activity from the list provided, or of course they could negotiate their own activity to demonstrate their learning. So these adjustments align with these strategies for choice: negotiating alternative tasks, assessment and products, planning open-ended tasks, and designing student interest tasks. Remember, if you decide to provide choice with assessment, which many of us do, you must assess the same outcomes for the assessment to be valid. As you become more familiar with using the tool, you'll notice that when you make adjustments, you may actually be using a range of differentiation adjustment approaches and strategies. So in this example, we also thought that the adjustments that we made supported creative and critical thinking by allowing opportunity for original design and responses. Here's another example, this time from our Stage 5 Spanish unit on healthy living, which we will publish in the next 2 weeks. So the unit is about living a healthy life and includes visiting the doctor. The base activities include reading sample dialogues and then writing a role and role-playing a conversation based on the new vocabulary and structures. The adjustment we made to this activity was to inject a little more creativity, in which students write a comedy skit, including cultural aspects. In this case, we did use the activity that we had for background speakers as our inspiration, but obviously with much more scaffolding. So what this did was enabled more scope for original design or responses and risk-taking and experimentation. Of course, anytime students experiment with a language, they are taking risks, but this example pushes them further in that direction. You could also say that it's an example of adjusting the level of abstraction, as students examine the underlying ideas behind humour in different cultures, such as plays on words, puns, double meanings, and so on. This example also embeds humour, which is a strategy from adjusting the learning environment. As I said, you'll find this too when you use the tool. Adjusting activities to meet the needs of individual students with high potential and giftedness can align with a range of adjustment types and strategies. So let's move to stage 6 now, and this is stage 6 continuous. The base activity is that students write a post for their lifestyle blog, giving their opinion on fashion. To adjust the complexity, in this case, of the activity, a student may instead write a blog post on how social media is affecting teenagers' fashion choices. This strategy involves making connections as students address a provocative question, leading them towards a deeper analysis of the topic. In this next example, the base activity is that students give a 1-minute speech on travel, justifying if they like it or not. In the adjusted activity, students debate the topic that everyone must travel overseas at least once in their lives. This adjusts the level of challenge by requiring students to explicitly reason by debating from different perspectives. Students undertaking the extension course are generally operating with high levels of critical and creative thinking, abstraction, and higher order thinking skills. As the course requires skills to explore different perspectives, our support materials, which are available on our website, provide scaffolds and samples to support you in embedding a range of activities to meet the needs of all learners, including high potential and gifted students. Do you remember Ella in stage 4? What we're going to do now is show you how to use the differentiation adjustment tool to support Ella's learning needs. If you were Ella's language teacher, you would be best placed to understand Ella's needs within the context of the languages classroom. She may have high potential in languages, she may not. The support on the HPGE website and what we're exploring today will help you to start identifying high potential in languages. And it will also support you to meet the needs of high potential and gifted students in your classroom across all 4 domains. Remember, we start with the student. We cannot make adjustments to suit Ella's learning needs unless we start with Ella herself. So what can we do to support her learning? You'll recall that Ella had already been identified as gifted in the creative and social emotional domains. So her language teacher reviewed her existing stage 4 program and saw that much of what she had planned would also work well for Ella. For example, one of the activities the teacher had already planned was to design a website for a pet shelter, and that would tap into Ella's social justice and her ability to think creatively. Remember, a rising tide lifts all ships, but by designing, engaging and challenging programs in the first place, Ella's teacher realised many of her activities would support high potential and gifted students too. However, Ella's teacher also realised that there were times Ella could benefit from adjustments, and she wanted to keep this manageable. So let's look at some examples of the adjustments that she made for Ella. In a unit on food, students were going to design a menu for use in a restaurant role play. For Ella, instead, she asked her to design a breakfast menu for students in need, justifying her choices. In another example, the teacher had planned as the base activity that students design a clothing catalogue. Instead, she asked Ella to write and perform a jingle instead. While some students wrote a restaurant review based on a scaffold, Ella wrote a review of a local restaurant and put it on Google Reviews. And in place of creating a video guided tour of her suburb, Ella built her suburb in Minecraft and then added voice recording. Providing opportunities for Ella to showcase her potential enabled Ella's teacher to identify if Ella had high potential in the intellectual domain in languages. Without providing those opportunities, Ella's teacher would not have known if Ella had high potential or not. Turns out that Ella did have high potential. The adjustments that Ella's teacher made also enabled the following strategies. Original responses to support creative and critical thinking. These are all from the differentiation adjustment tool. They enabled an inquiry-based approach to enhance complexity. In the case of the Google restaurant review, Ella was provided with a real audience, which supported authenticity. And in all examples, there was less repetition and moving more quickly to open-ended tasks, which adjusts both pace and choice. Of course, Ella could also have had the opportunity to negotiate her own product, which would give her an even greater level of choice. Hopefully, these really concrete examples showcase that it's not about extra work for you or for your student. Rather, it's about developing the skills to make adjustments which aren't arduous to design, but which still meet the needs of individual students. Here are some other more general considerations that can support Ella's learning needs. Ensure Ella is able to use technology, which supports her to manage her dysgraphia. By focusing on her ability to compose texts instead of her ability to handwrite, you're better equipped to see her potential. Allowing Ella to work individually or with likability peers to avoid her potential being stifled if she's feeling frustrated with constant group work. Co-designing marking guidelines for assessment opportunities. Discuss what a great response would look like, which I'm sure you do with all students, so that Ella in particular can take greater ownership of her learning and help her organisation. This also embeds opportunities for student voice, just as offering alternative learning experiences can do. And you could also consider, like you could with all students, a scaffolded learning journal, so Ella's better equipped to reflect on her learning and plan her next steps. As I keep saying, these strategies can support all students, including high potential and gifted students.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So how you use the differentiation adjustment tool is up to you. The most important thing to remember is that you start with the student and the assessment and identification of their learning needs, and you make adjustments based on those needs. For example, do they need more choice? Are they able to work at a faster pace? Do they need to be challenged to think more creatively? And so on. Some teachers prefer to start by adjusting the activity, and then they use the tool as a checkpoint to make sure that the adjustments they have made support the needs of the high potential and gifted students in their class. Other teachers prefer to start with the tool and then adjust the activity. And some teachers move to and fro until they feel that the adjustment they have is just right. Remember, it's just that. It's a tool. It's not a mandated checklist, and it's a tool that exists purely to help you. Finally, when providing choice with assessment, you must remember that for the assessment to be valid, you must assess the same outcomes. The Stage 4 Indonesian assessment task on the Languages website is a great example that leads you through how to do this.
Today's session has been a lot to take in, and no one expects you to be an expert on high potential and gifted education after 50 minutes. We do hope Marek and I have got you thinking, and after today, it would be good to start planning your next steps. When we were planning this presentation, one of the HPGE team members told me that a participant in one of their introductory courses had said, "When I returned to school after your professional learning, it was like a veil had been lifted from my eyes." And I just love this. The new policy supports us to see the potential in students so much more clearly and to understand what may sit behind some of their behaviours.
So as we come to the end, I would recommend that you pace yourself and you plan your next steps. You may want to start by jotting down something that you'd like to achieve in the next month, and then some things you'd like to achieve in the next 6-month and 12-month periods. We've just put some ideas on the slide for you to read now, but it's totally up to you. I'll give you a moment to read through these. For the professional learning for the policy, we're encouraging schools to try and implement the policy with 1 or 2 statement points for their initial focus. And it's the same thing for teachers. We're asking that you keep your goals manageable and achievable, start small, and develop your expertise and confidence as you progress. As we've mentioned, the department has a dedicated HBG web section for the policy and to support its implementation, but also to support high potential and gifted students. This is where you can take your learning further. The website unpacks both the policy and its implementation through the supporting educators section, which you can see a link to on the slide. There is implementation advice and resources under the section for school leaders and teachers. It also includes a list of all available professional learning and illustrations of practice. And these illustrations of practice are specifically designed to support schools to implement the policy through their own unique contexts, stories, and students. And these IOPs, or illustrations of practice, contain a range of podcasts, films, animations, and so on of the policy in practice in context. If you haven't already, I highly encourage you to take the time to take a look at this content.
So that concludes our presentation today. As an introductory session, we're sure you'd like to know more and that you still have questions. In the chat, I'm going to stop sharing it in the moment so I can see the chat, but please share what you would like from our team next to support you in implementing this new policy. Would you like more professional learning? Would you like resources? If it is professional learning, what are you thinking? Let us know any and all of your ideas. Just add them to the chat, or if you'd prefer, you can reply to our post in the statewide staff room, which I will add after today's session. And also, what questions do you still have? You can also add those to the chat or raise your hand, and Marek and I will do our best to answer. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that, and I'll also stop recording so that we can answer your questions.